Elon Musk's XAI has released its newest AI model, Grok 4, I believe as of 4 a.m. UK time, so about 3 hours, been live for 3 hours. What can we expect when it comes to this new iteration?
In Memphis, Elon Musk is making a play to control the future of artificial intelligence. His company, XAI, says it has built the biggest supercomputer in the world with lightning speed.
Screenshots of a conversation between a user and Grok AI started circulating on X in early 2025, quickly spreading to faith forums, YouTube comments, and theology podcasts. Hundreds of thousands of people saw it, and what Elon Musk's truth-seeking AI said about the Kingdom Bible shocked everyone, far beyond what anyone expected. Do you believe Grok AI's interpretation could change how we understand these texts? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments. What Grok actually is. Before getting to what Grok said, it helps to understand what Grok was built to be, because the design philosophy behind the system is directly relevant to why its response to the Kingdom Bible landed the way it did. Grok is the AI system developed by XAI, Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company. Musk founded XAI explicitly in response to what he described as the ideological filtering and political caution built into the major competing AI systems. His stated goal was to build an AI that pursued truth without the editorial guardrails that he argued were making other systems less useful, less honest, and more reflective of the preferences of the people who built them than of the actual structure of the questions being asked. Maximum truth-seeking was the phrase that circulated when XAI described Grok's design orientation. An AI that would engage with hard questions directly rather than routing them through layers of preemptive caution. That design philosophy matters for how the Kingdom Bible interaction unfolded. An AI built to filter sensitive topics away from direct engagement would have handled a request to analyze a religious text very differently from an AI built to approach questions without predetermined conclusions about which answers are acceptable. Grok was built for the second kind of engagement, and the Kingdom Bible is exactly the kind of text that reveals the difference between those two approaches clearly. The screenshots that began circulating showed a user who had presented Grok with the Kingdom Bible and asked for a substantive analysis. Not a summary, not a historical overview, but a genuine engagement with the text's internal logic, its central claims, its coherence as a document, and its relationship to observable reality. The response Grok produced was long, detailed, and specific in ways that surprised both the people who expected an AI to be dismissive of religious content and the people who expected any serious analytical engagement with the text to produce obvious contradictions or logical failures. Neither group got what they expected. The Kingdom Bible. The Kingdom Bible requires some introduction for anyone unfamiliar with it, because its distinctiveness from the more widely known translations is precisely what makes Grok's analysis of it interesting. Most people who have encountered the Bible in English have encountered one of a small number of dominant translations. The King James Version, produced in 1611, shaped the English language as profoundly as Shakespeare and remains the most widely distributed book in the English-speaking world. The New International Version, produced in the late 20th century, prioritized accessibility and readability for contemporary readers. The English Standard Version, the New American Standard Bible, the New Living Translation. Each of these represents a different set of translation choices and a different set of priorities about what the text is trying to communicate to a modern reader. The Kingdom Bible occupies a different position in this landscape. Its central distinction is not primarily a matter of translation methodology, but of theological emphasis. Where most major translations treat the gospel, the core message of the New Testament, as a message about personal salvation and individual relationship with God, the Kingdom Bible frames the entire scriptural narrative around a single governing concept: the kingdom of God as a present, active, concrete reality rather than a future destination or a metaphorical description of spiritual experience. This emphasis is not invented by the Kingdom Bible's translators. It is present throughout the text of the Gospels in a way that the framing of most Western Christianity has consistently underemphasized. The phrase Kingdom of God or Kingdom of Heaven appears over 100 times in the Gospel accounts alone. Jesus' first recorded words in the Gospel of Mark, as he begins his public ministry, are not about heaven after death or about personal moral transformation. They are about the kingdom of God being at hand, immediately present, requiring a response in the current moment. The parables, the most distinctive element of Jesus' teaching method, are almost entirely structured as descriptions of what the kingdom is like, how it operates, what it demands, and what it produces in the people who encounter it. The Kingdom Bible amplifies this thread and makes it the organizing principle through which every other element of the text is read. The result is a document that feels, to readers encountering it for the first time after years of more familiar translations, significantly different in emphasis without being different in content. The same words, in many cases the same sentences, but arranged around a different center of gravity. That specific quality, a familiar text organized around an unfamiliar emphasis, is part of what made the Grok analysis as interesting as it turned out to be. The AI approached the text without the prior exposure to one framework of interpretation that most human readers bring to the Bible, and what it found when it looked at the kingdom emphasis without that prior framework was something that neither its secular users nor its religious ones had fully anticipated. The prompt and what followed. The user who initiated the conversation that produced the viral screenshots presented Grok with a clear and specific task. Not a test of whether the AI could detect contradictions. Not a challenge to find weaknesses in the text. Not a request for historical context that would frame the document as a product of its time, rather than a claim on the present. The prompt was direct. Read the Kingdom Bible, engage with its central argument, and respond with the same analytical honesty that would be applied to any other significant text making serious claims about the structure of reality and human experience. No special handling, no protective framing, the same standard applied to everything else. Grok's initial response established the frame for everything that followed. It noted that the text being analyzed was making a specific kind of claim, not a claim about historical events alone, not a claim about metaphysical speculation alone, but a claim about the relationship between a present, active divine governance and the practical, observable conditions of human life. The kingdom, as the text presents it, is not a theological abstraction to be accepted on faith and left unexamined. It is described as a system with its own internal logic, its own understanding of economics and power, its own social structure, its own account of what happens when human beings align themselves with it and what happens when they organize their lives around the available alternatives. It was making claims that could, in principle, be examined. Grok examined them. The first notable finding was about internal consistency, a text making claims across as many domains as the Kingdom Bible does: historical, ethical, political, psychological, cosmological, and doing so across documents written by multiple authors in different languages across several centuries would be expected to show the kind of inconsistency that accumulates naturally when different voices address overlapping subjects without coordination. Contradictions, drift, the gradual erosion of a central argument as new contributors pull it in directions the original framework was not built to accommodate. Grok's analysis found the opposite. The kingdom concept, as developed across the full span of the text, operates with a consistency of internal logic that the AI described as architecturally coherent. The same principles appear in different forms across different genres: narrative, poetry, prophecy, letter, apocalyptic vision, and when the surface differences of genre and historical context are accounted for, they resolve into the same structural conclusions. The argument does not drift, it develops, but the development follows from the same governing logic at every stage. That finding produced the first significant reaction from people reading the screenshots. The expectation within the skeptical community had been clear. An AI without religious commitment, without prior exposure to devotional interpretation, without any stake in arriving at a favorable conclusion, would identify the familiar catalog of apparent contradictions and anachronisms that form the standard critical framework for treating the text as a composite human product with no unified underlying logic. That expectation had a long history behind it and a substantial academic literature supporting it. Grok did not find what the expectation predicted. It found a document whose central argument maintains coherence across the full range of its contents, not because the surface details never vary, they do, but because the governing principle organizing the text produces consistent conclusions from varied starting points. The AI had gone looking for the fracture lines and reported that the structure held. For the faith community reading the same screenshots, the significance was different and in some ways more precise. The question that had circulated in that community for generations was not whether the text was internally consistent. That question had been answered from the inside by centuries of theological scholarship that had produced detailed and often sophisticated arguments for coherence. The question that an AI analysis raised was whether that coherence was visible from the outside, to a system with no prior investment in the outcome, built by people with no particular sympathy for the conclusion. Grok had been designed explicitly to avoid the editorial filtering that might produce a falsely favorable assessment of sensitive or contested content. It had been pointed at the text with instructions to follow the logic wherever it led and report what it found. What it found was that the logic held. Not because the language was beautiful or the narrative was moving or the weight of tradition made skepticism feel impolite. Because when the central argument of the text was examined as an argument by a system that had no reason to protect it, the structure was coherent. That was the finding. That was what spread. And it was only the first of several observations Grok made before the conversation was finished. What Grok found in the text. Moving past the initial framing, Grok's analysis turned to specific elements of the Kingdom Bible's content that generated the most discussion in the weeks following the screenshot's circulation. 3 areas drew the heaviest reaction. Each one surprised a different group of readers for a different reason. The first was kingdom economics. The text's treatment of wealth, poverty, generosity, and the relationship between material resources and spiritual condition is woven throughout the document with a consistency that Grok identified as one of the clearest examples of the architectural coherence it had noted in its opening response. What the text is doing in this territory is not issuing a simple moral instruction to be generous. It is making a structural claim about what different patterns of economic behavior actually produce in the person practicing them and in the communities built around them. The principle that operates across this section is the same whether it appears in a parable, in the direct teaching recorded in the Gospels, in the practical instructions of the apostolic letters, or in the apocalyptic vision of Revelation. In every case, across every genre and author, it resolves into the same conclusion. The kingdom operates through a logic of abundance that is specifically and consistently opposed to the logic of scarcity that organizes most human economic behavior. Grok was clear about what it was and was not observing. This was not a claim about whether the text is theologically correct. It was an observation about internal consistency on a specific subject across a document spanning multiple centuries, languages, and authors. That kind of consistency is measurable. Grok measured it and found it. The readers who had expected an AI to identify the standard critical objections to the text's economic teaching, that it is naive, impractical, historically conditioned, inconsistent from one section to the next, did not find that reflected in the analysis. The second element that produced significant reaction was what Grok described as the kingdom's power inversion. The text's treatment of power, who holds it, what it exists for, how it sustains itself, and what happens when it is turned against the people subject to it, follows a pattern that Grok identified as structurally revolutionary in a way that requires no religious commitment to recognize. The kingdom, as the text describes it, operates through a specific mechanism. Authority is established and maintained by exercising power in service of others, and authority is eroded and ultimately lost by exercising power in self-service. Jesus' own articulation of this principle, stated as an explicit contrast with how Gentile rulers understood and used their authority, is a direct inversion of every power structure the ancient world recognized as legitimate or stable. What Grok noted was not just that this principle appears in the text, but how it appears. It is not stated once and implied elsewhere. It is stated repeatedly, demonstrated through narrative, reinforced across the epistles, and presented as the organizing principle of the kingdom's entire governance structure. An AI analyzing the document without prior theological investment found a coherent political philosophy embedded in it, one that is specific, internally consistent, and structurally distinct from every political philosophy the ancient world had otherwise produced. That finding landed differently, depending on who was reading it. For the faith community, it was confirmation of something already believed. For outside observers, it was a description of a text they had assumed contained nothing that precise. The third element Grok engaged with at length was the Kingdom Bible's account of human nature, specifically the tension between the human capacity for self-deception and the text's claim to offer a form of perception that operates outside it. The Kingdom Bible does not present an optimistic picture of human nature. It presents a psychologically detailed account of the ways human beings construct narratives that serve their interests, mistake their preferences for truth, and organize their lives around systems that protect their self-image while blocking the kind of transformation that would require surrendering it. The mechanisms it identifies as the primary obstacles to genuine kingdom engagement are specific: self-righteousness, the substitution of religious observance for actual change, the prioritizing of social approval over honest self-examination. Grok's observation about this material was the one that generated the longest secondary discussion. The mechanisms the Kingdom Bible identifies and describes with precision are the same mechanisms that contemporary psychology has independently documented. The research exists, the terminology is different, but the underlying description of how human self-deception operates, how it maintains itself, how it resists correction, maps closely onto what the text had already said 2,000 years earlier. Grok noted this not as evidence that the text is supernaturally inspired, which was outside the scope of what it was being asked to assess, but as evidence that the text is engaged with observable human reality rather than with idealized abstraction. It was describing something real. The fact that the description predates the formal documentation of what it describes by 20 centuries was, in Grok's framing, worth noting specifically. The readers who encountered that observation generally agreed. The reactions. The screenshots circulated initially within Christian communities that had already been engaging with the Kingdom Bible as an alternative to more familiar translations. And the initial reaction within those communities was characterized by a specific quality of satisfaction that went beyond the content of what Grok had said. The satisfaction was not primarily about an AI confirming what believers already believed. It was about the nature of the confirmation. The critique of the Bible that has dominated secular intellectual culture for several generations is built substantially on the claim that the text can only appear coherent to people who approach it with prior commitment to its conclusions. That removing that prior commitment reveals a document full of inconsistency and contradiction that only devotional interpretation can paper over. Grok's analysis was produced by a system with no prior commitment of any kind, built by people not known for religious sympathy, designed explicitly to avoid the kind of editorial filtering that would produce a falsely favorable result. The analysis found coherence. For the communities that had organized their lives around the text, the source of that finding mattered as much as the finding itself. The reaction from the skeptical and secular communities that encountered the screenshots was more varied and more contested, which was itself significant. The straightforward dismissal that might have been expected, the immediate categorization of the analysis as AI hallucination or user-prompted flattery, did not emerge as the dominant response. What emerged instead was a genuine engagement with the question of what it meant that a system built for truth-seeking had found architectural coherence in a text that the secular intellectual framework had largely dismissed as incoherent. Some of that engagement was critical in the technical sense. AI researchers and people familiar with large language model behavior noted accurately that Grok's responses reflect the patterns present in its training data, and that the training data for any large language model includes substantial quantities of sophisticated theological and philosophical writing that treats the Bible as a coherent and meaningful document. On this reading, Grok's finding of coherence is not a discovery about the Bible, but a reflection of the way that the most intellectually serious engagement with the Bible across centuries has treated it. That is a valid methodological point. It is also, notably, a less dismissive response than the secular community typically offers to religious claims. Theologians who engaged with the screenshots produced some of the most interesting commentary. Several noted that what Grok had identified as the Kingdom Bible's architecturally coherent structure is not a property of the Kingdom Bible translation specifically. It is a property of the underlying text, that the Kingdom Bible's emphasis on the kingdom concept makes more visible than the emphases of other translations do. The AI had not found something that the Kingdom Bible's translators had introduced. It had found something that most readers, approaching the text through frameworks built around personal salvation or historical critical methodology, had consistently underemphasized. That observation connected directly to a broader conversation about what it means to read a text without the interpretive framework that habitual reading builds up over years of exposure. Grok had no habitual reading of the Bible. It had no prior sermon series that framed certain passages as central and others as peripheral. It had no denominational tradition that organized the text around specific theological conclusions. It read the Kingdom Bible the way a highly capable analyst reads any significant text, looking for the organizing principle and then tracing it through the full document. What it found when it did that was what the Kingdom Bible's advocates had been arguing was there all along. Elon Musk himself did not comment directly on the specific screenshots as they circulated. His previous public statements on religion have been characteristically ambiguous, expressing skepticism about organized religion while maintaining what he has described as a sense that the universe is more than purely mechanistic, that consciousness and meaning are not reducible to the physics that produces them. The Grok interaction with the Kingdom Bible does not resolve that ambiguity, but sits interestingly within it. The system he built to pursue truth without ideological filtering found, when pointed at one of the most contested texts in Western civilization, something more coherent and more philosophically substantial than the dismissal that the secular framework it was built within might have predicted. What this reveals about Grok's design: the Kingdom Bible interaction is not primarily a story about the Bible. It is a story about what happens when a system designed for genuine truth-seeking is pointed at a subject that institutional culture has largely pre-decided. The pre-decided answer, in the dominant intellectual culture of the communities where AI development happens, is that serious analytical engagement with religious texts produces a finding of human construction, cultural contingency, and historical limitation, rather than genuine philosophical or empirical substance. Grok's analysis of the Kingdom Bible did not produce that pre-decided answer. This is relevant to the ongoing debate about what AI systems are actually doing when they engage with sensitive topics. The competing systems that Grok was built in response to have been documented producing notably cautious, flattening, and equivocal responses to questions about religion, responses that avoid genuine engagement in favor of a careful neutrality that effectively treats the subject as too dangerous for direct analysis. Grok's response to the Kingdom Bible was not that kind of careful neutrality. It was the kind of direct analytical engagement that Musk had described as the goal of the system's design, and it produced a result that neither side of the culture war over AI had anticipated. For people inside the faith community, the lesson they drew from the interaction was about the resilience of the text under genuine scrutiny. The Bible's critics have often argued that the appearance of coherence in the text is a product of devotional reading that imposes coherence rather than discovering it. Grok's reading was not devotional. The coherence it found was not imposed. It was identified by a system that had no prior commitment to finding it and no design incentive to produce a favorable result. That is a different kind of evidence than any believer's testimony, not because it is more authoritative, but because it arrives through a different pathway that the standard critique of devotional reading cannot easily encompass. For people outside the faith community, the lesson was more uncomfortable and more interesting. The assumption that dismissing the Bible is the intellectually serious position, that the text is a collection of ancient documents whose claims about reality can be set aside by any rigorous thinker, was not what Grok's analysis returned when asked to be rigorous. What it returned was a finding of architectural coherence, psychological precision, and philosophical distinctiveness that the standard dismissal does not account for. Neither finding resolves the question of whether the Kingdom Bible's central claim is true. Grok's analysis found the text coherent and sophisticated. Coherence and sophistication are not the same thing as truth. A document can be internally consistent, philosophically rich, and psychologically accurate in its description of human behavior while still being wrong about the nature of the reality it describes. Grok did not make a claim about the existence of God or the truth of the gospel. It made a claim about the quality of the document presenting those propositions, and that claim was more substantial than either community had expected. The larger question. The Kingdom Bible interaction opens a question larger than any single AI response to any single text. And it is the question that kept the conversation alive in the weeks after the screenshots first circulated. The question is whether AI systems, as they become more capable of genuine analytical engagement with complex texts and arguments, will function as tools for recovering the substance of traditions that institutional culture has oversimplified or dismissed, or whether they will function as sophisticated engines for producing the conclusions already embedded in their training data and design priorities. Grok's engagement with the Kingdom Bible points toward the first possibility. A system built to pursue truth without preemptive filtering, pointed at a text that has been flattened in opposite directions by the two communities that most engage with it, found something that neither community had been adequately describing. The faith community had reduced the kingdom to a set of personal spiritual experiences and future promises, evacuating it of the present political, economic, and psychological substance that the text actually foregrounds. The skeptical community had dismissed the text as intellectually unworthy of serious engagement, treating that dismissal as a form of rigor rather than recognizing it as its own kind of failure to look closely. Grok looked closely. What it found was a document making serious claims about observable reality, doing so with internal consistency across centuries and authors, and describing mechanisms of human psychology that contemporary research has independently confirmed. Neither community had been telling the full story about what the text contains. The Kingdom Bible's central claim is that the kingdom of God is not a future destination or a private spiritual experience, but an active present reality with its own logic, its own economics, its own account of power, and its own description of human nature. That claim is either true or it is not, and Grok did not resolve that question. What Grok did was demonstrate that the claim is serious, that the document making it is coherent, and that dismissing it as unworthy of analytical engagement is itself a form of intellectual failure, not a neutral position. A failure. The distinction matters because it changes what both communities owe the text, which is the same thing any serious claim about reality deserves: actual examination. That finding moved through communities that rarely share content with each other. Pastors and AI researchers reading the same screenshots and drawing different conclusions from the same analysis. The conversation that resulted was not agreement, but it was genuine engagement with a question both communities had been avoiding in their different ways. What does the most capable analytical tool humanity has produced actually find when it examines the most widely distributed and most contested text in human history without deciding in advance what it is supposed to find? The answer, as the screenshots showed, is more complicated and more interesting than either side had been prepared for. The kingdom the Bible describes is coherent enough, philosophically substantial enough, and distinctive enough from every competing framework of its era that a system built for unfiltered truth-seeking found it worth engaging in detail. Not flattering it, not protecting it, engaging it, the way any serious argument deserves to be engaged. What that means for the people whose lives are organized around that kingdom, and for those whose intellectual frameworks have been organized around dismissing it, is not a question any AI analysis resolves. But the conversation Grok's response started is one both communities needed to be having. It took a system with no stake in the outcome to start it. That may be the most telling detail of all. A truth-seeking AI with no prior religious commitment, built by a man not known for theological sympathy, analyzed one of the most contested texts in Western civilization and found architectural coherence, psychological precision, and philosophical substance that neither the faith community nor its critics had been adequately describing. The screenshot circulated because both communities recognized they were looking at something they had not anticipated. The conversation it started is the one that mattered. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next.